So today is the day when finally get to drive Emira. Electric seats on a Lotus, Jesus. That looks a bit easier. Let's see. Is it actually easier to get into? A little bit, possibly. Good grief, here we go. Here we go. I have to admit, finding that slightly annoying already, but can get to it through that, anyway, whatever. I think it feels like that should be angled more towards the driver if we're in a car for the drivers, etc. Anyway, I think I've got this seat set up more to my liking. Mirrors are definitely better than Evora, but no surprise there. So I guess let's fire it up and take it out. No handbrake. I guess we've got an electronic handbrake somewhere. Gearbox. Gear shift feels very familiar. So, very first thoughts before even driving it on the road. Yeah, it is a nice interior. It's all quite small and compact. I could do with lower seats or sitting lower, definitely. I don't have a great deal of headroom here. This is the seat's on the lowest setting. I can tilt them back further, like that, which is pretty reclined. I have to say it's not as easy to get in and out of as I was expecting. Certainly I don't actually see it's any better than the Evora in that regard. In terms of getting in and out. Getting out, easy enough. In terms of getting in with my position, I have to do exactly the same. It's there's slightly more room for your feet to swing in there, I suppose. But I have to do exactly the same thing as I do with the Evora, which is put my weight down there on the sill and get in that way. So it's not night and day actually any better than an Evora to get in and out of, if I'm being honest, but obviously a massive improvement over an Exige or a Lease. You know, I think Lotus described it as a hygiene issue. It's an essential starting point for a car to sell in large numbers, getting in and out. It's not the be all and end all best thing about this car, but having to fiddle around quite a lot to get things linked up to get my phone linked up to it and stuff, but I'm sure I'll work that out. I have found the handbrake is down there somewhere, which is good. This thing, why not, I suppose, Lamborghini inspired theatre. Anyway, many thanks to Hendy Performance for giving me this as a loan car today while my GT430 is in for a service. It's going to be fascinating. So again, the Evora's rotary controls are often criticised. This is a more modern climate control type setup, and it blows an absolute gale through these vents. The vents are nice in that you turn them on like that, so you close them like that, open them like that. They're nice looking, but it's quite in auto. If I set it to low, it really does blow quite a gale, so I don't want heated seats. How do I turn the fan down? Off. So I want to just keep it set to low. Maybe I need this on 18 or something and then set that to auto and see how that goes. But anyway, I'm glad at least it has physical buttons as well as the touch screen. That's a good thing. Let's see if we can try and link this phone up. See how long that takes me. Okay, so that was pretty quick, setting up CarPlay. That's good, it's pretty slick actually. Steering wheel I'm not a big fan of already, if I'm being honest, but we'll get used to it. At least I've got plenty of time in the car today. So got my drive mode switch down here, and it goes, these are the different screens. So we got sport and track, and I have to say, nicely done. I haven't driven very far or very fast yet, but first thoughts are struggling a bit to get really comfortable in the seats actually. The headrest is kind of weird, it's quite thin, so you kind of don't get support either side. There doesn't feel like much lateral support around there, but plenty, but quite a lot under the thighs. So I haven't really been able to extend it yet, but obviously it is much quieter than the Evora. I don't think that's a bad thing. The Evora is borderline antisocial at times, and you do feel like overtaking old ladies. You have to keep it under 4,500 revs. But there is a lovely mid-engined feel to the steering response. Steering doesn't, mainly because of the steering wheel, doesn't feel exactly the same as the Evora's, but there's a lovely change of direction. The nose feels very eager to sniff out a turn and change direction. The gearbox doesn't feel any different to the Evora really to me. I can't notice any sort of improvement there. Yeah, it does feel like a very nice handling car. Visibility is great. Wing mirrors are great. Visibility is definitely improved over the Evora, and the reversing camera on here is a fantastic addition and useful for any car with limited rear visibility. That's one of the modern tech features that I really do, see the benefit of. The thickness of the wheels slightly, I don't know, it doesn't quite have the feel coming back that the Evora does from the wheel. So I was expecting the steering to feel identical to the Evora, but it's not actually. It may just be the wheel, but it's slightly lacking in some texture for me. So yeah, it's got a nice level of performance. This car's carrying extra weight. I can notice the mid-range is a bit blunted. It doesn't have that eagerness to pull. And it definitely gets going above 5,000. Feels more top-ended. There's no question this is an easier car to live with every day, or this would be an easier car to live with every day, and that's what Lotus wanted. That was Lotus's primary goal. Their goal wasn't to make a better or faster performance car than the Evora, especially the GT430. I'm comparing a car towards the end of its production life to a car at the very beginning. So if I compare this to the NA, to the normally aspirated 280 horsepower Evora, this is a quantum leap into the future. However, there is a snag, and that is that actually this is a 90 grand car now with extras over £90,000. So actually it is a choice of a new one of these or a GT430. For a little bit more you could get a GT430 which will not lose money. This will. That will drive, it will be a much more thrilling, more intense, more engaging driver's car on the road and more capable track car, but that's the GT430. You could get yourself a GT410 Evora and save quite a bit of money and have more of a visceral, purer sports car drive than this. So I think that's where it gets tricky, because of the price inflation on this car. That whole choice has become more difficult, and I think as much as I like this car, and if it was your only car, I can see why you might go for one of these if it was your daily driver. However, I don't buy a Lotus for that. I wouldn't buy a Lotus for a daily driver, and I think if I'm being honest, I would probably go Evora 410 over this and save myself some money. That's my view, but I don't want to take anything away from this car. It's a really nice car to drive. It's surprisingly different. I totally get it why someone would have one of these, and I totally get why the people that do have these love them and rave about them. It's fabulous, but it's not necessarily what I would choose. This is a much milder car, intentionally so, and I can see the benefits of that. It's supposed to be a more daily usable car, not a wild track focused special. So yeah, the steering is not the same as the Evora's. It's possibly even more responsive initially to turn in. The front end really dives into a turn. It's very responsive. I suppose the biggest compliment I could pay is it's possibly more like a grown-up Exige in some ways. It doesn't feel as much like the Evora as I thought. Obviously the drivetrain, the engine, gearbox and everything is identical, and it is a slightly more muted version of an outrageously loud car, so I can actually live with that. I think for a more daily usable car, that's a reasonable compromise. I think they've hit quite a nice balance with that. And this car's on the Goodyear tyres, and the ride, I think, for a sports car is perfectly acceptable, if perhaps not quite as smooth as you might expect for a daily Lotus, but it handles rough roads really well, so as you'd expect. But yeah, I'm just slightly surprised the steering response is perhaps sharper, yet there appears to be less feel and feedback, which I was not expecting at all, given this is the same hydraulic system. So that's one of the more interesting takeouts from this first drive experience. But I cannot, for the life of me, work out how to change the radio station. The brakes are a bit grabby, a bit over servoed initially, but that's fine. You can easily get used to that. I'm finding the infotainment unnecessarily complicated and fiddly, but it's the sort of thing that's really hard for a small volume manufacturer to do, but they've done it, and hats off to them for that. It's not an easy thing to work out, intuitive infotainment systems. So some of the things I really like are this door handle. I think these are really lovely, nice to use. They feel strong, lovely shape, lovely design. I think the KEF audio is a little bit underwhelming, the stereo, if I'm being honest, totally honest, but this is lovely finishing, isn't it? I like the details on that. This, I thought, wasn't the nicest thing in the world to use, so there's no thing. Old-fashioned, I would have preferred a nice screw cap there instead of that, but it's fine, isn't it? Who cares? Some Goodyear tyres. I would definitely recommend having this suede stuff here if you want to go hard cornering. The big question is, what would a spicier Emira be like? But what's it going to cost? It's definitely going to be north of 100 grand, isn't it? But we will deal with that when we get to it. Now, I really want to try and do my best not to make this a moan about modern cars and the things we have to put up with, but this car is only 3,000 miles and this key fob is looking a bit battered already, because where we used to just dangle them down there, they now have nowhere to put them, so they tend to go in places like that and get knocked about. But anyway, like I said, lots of modern car irritations, but overall an amazing, impressive job. I totally understand why Lotus have made this car, why they've had to make this car. I still don't feel this is the very best Lotus could do. I think they've held back for faster, later versions. They've tried to make the car more rounded, which I get. It just means it's not going to appeal as much to me. These stalks, I mean, are they really that much better than the Evora Ford Focus stalks? Not really. But yes, fabulous thing. I really did enjoy driving it, and that's what matters most, and I really did. There's no denying that. So there's a lot to like about this car. When you get up close, there's some paint issues there. This is a car with 3,000 miles. So as a demonstration of something this car does with ease that very few Lotuses have been able to do before, here's a speed bump. Quite a nasty one. I do think my GT430 would struggle to get over that without making contact. And here's another one. So that's one less stress you have to worry about. This car they've really considered speed bump clearance, and I haven't made any contact at all with the nose. So that's an impressive practical benefit, particularly for people that live in cities where there are lots of speed bumps around. So I've spent quite a bit of time in this car now, and I've grown to like this car an awful lot actually. It's a really, really nice car. That shouldn't have ever really been in question. I suppose I had an expectation from Lotus that they would go another way. I understand why they've gone this way, and that makes sense. The one thing that this is missing is the chance to take the roof off. If you're going for a softer, less hardcore sports car, to be able to get the roof off an Emira, that would suddenly put it in a category that the Evora couldn't really match in terms of driving enjoyment, for those who like driving with the roof off. It's a fantastic manual, rear-wheel drive, supercharged V6 coupe, no question about that. And about as good an example of that as you'll get in the modern era. But I don't think it has moved the game on from the outgoing Evora, and I suppose that for me was what I was hoping for. And it was easier to understand at the price that the car was launched at. It's becoming harder as it creeps back up to and above the prices that the Evora was left off at, if that makes any sense. As I said earlier today, my description of how it goes, it's definitely softer lower in the rev range. It's softer, it doesn't pull as hard, it doesn't feel like it has as much torque. And then all of a sudden, as you get nearer 4.5, 5, it's almost as if something's been released. You can sort of feel a release of power, and then it pulls strongly up and to over 6. It does feel a bit like, if I'm being honest, it would pull very much like an Evora 410 if it could just rev to 7,000, but it feels like it's just been clipped off at the top. The top part of the power has just been snipped off. That said, it does pull strongly, and it pulls hard above 6. I think it's a bit more supercharger whine possibly than I'm used to. That might be because I'm slightly closer to the engine, not sure. If you keep the revs up on this, it's not going, it should stay with an Evora 400, certainly, 410. But the 430 just builds more intensity on top of the stronger lower down pull. So they feel more different than I thought they would actually in that regard. Let's put it into sport. So you have to hit it twice to get it to wake it up, and then you have to hit it again, and then you change it to sport. It does make quite a nice sort of gurgly sound on the overrun with the exhaust pop, sort of muted pops and crackles. Only in sport you can get rid of it by going back to tour, but it doesn't really seem to make the exhaust any louder to me, and the same goes for track mode. But the Evora never quite made those crackles and on the exhaust overrun that this does. So it's something they've engineered in, and it's quite nice. It adds a little bit of oral flavour to proceedings. I mean, it's a wonderful car for a B road. The damping is excellent for a sports car. It's got masses of grip, resists roll very well, really, in terms of road driving, certainly. So I guess how I feel about it, I suppose, is there a point of changing from an Evora 400 to this? Not really in terms of performance, but you knew that already. But yes, if you just wanted a newer car with modern accoutrements, then this is that car. I know styling is a huge part of why people love this car. This is a 60s. I have to knock the revs down. You can heel and toe, no problem. Pretty straightforward. On the basis of driving this, I would, for the manual on the V6, I would probably definitely go that way, I think, over the 4-cylinder. Even though I think performance is going to be very similar, because the 4-cylinder actually has more torque than this, which would probably make it feel a bit faster for people that don't like to rev the knackers out of their cars. I know people have different styles. Some people prefer more low-end and mid-range torque, and I think the 4-cylinder is probably going to suit them better. This does need to be revved out to make good progress. But I think that's a nice thing in a sports car. I welcome that in a sports car, because it means it's perfectly happy and civilised to potter about like this. But when you get the space and the opportunity to give it a bit more, like here for example, so yeah, it's got a lovely, nice glide about it at higher speed. But yes, if I could just try and slow down a bit, I can demonstrate how it pulls. So this is in sport. So because it's got more supercharger whine, it sounds actually like it's revving really highly, which is quite a neat trick, because Lotus have pulled the revs down, but it doesn't feel as low revving as it would otherwise. I mean, I still think those extra 200 would give you your 410 horsepower, and it is essentially exactly the same as the 410 engine in an Evora or Exige, but just clipped at the top, which I don't think they needed to do that, to be honest. I think they can only have done that to make headroom for a faster version, which will come out in due course. I guess the other thing was longevity. of all the parts of the supercharger and the engine. I guess there's that as well. Yeah, it is in no way a slow car. So again, it's 4.5. Yeah, you could have a fantastic time on the road like this, and it's be a very fast, very capable car. Where I am with it is I would wait to see what the faster versions would be like, but if I had an Evora 400, I could see why you might get into one of these. If I had a previous Evora S or an older car and I just wanted a newer Lotus with much of the same things that I enjoyed about my older one, plus whistles and bells, then I can see why you get into this. 410 owners, less so. That's Evora 410 owners. Maybe Exige owners who want something a bit more grown up and a bit more practical. I can see that because it does feel like it has some things in common with the Exige. So a pretty brutal cutout. Really, that would unsettle a car on track if you hit the cutout. So you want to pay attention to your shift lights. That throws weight forward onto the nose. I'd prefer a softer cutout, but this one is pretty brutal at 6.8. Now track mode, I'm not sure really what that offers, and it's claiming to have more exhaust and more response with less electronic nannying, but we'll see. Track mode has some fantastic information, but tiny, but fantastic. I've got a power figure, I've got a torque figure, and I can see my boost pressure, all of which is utterly fantastic. Lotus have been typically quite simplistic with instruments, and I've got a G meter as well, so I've got information like I've never had in a Lotus. I like that stuff, but in all seriousness, maybe there's some benefit for reviewing footage afterwards, but whilst you're driving a car fast, the chances of being able to see any of these bits of information is pretty ludicrous, but I like it. I like having it. It's silly, but I like it. So I can tell you that 70 miles an hour takes up a slight hill, 47 horsepower and 120 torques or thereabouts, but I'm going up a slight incline. Yeah, so the thought of a faster version with some more revs is pretty mouth-watering. This is a huge amount of car, given this is the base car. This is the entry point, the starting point in its development path. It's a pretty awesome base car, and that's the bit that has to be remembered, really. Got great breadth of ability. It would be a more comfortable long-distance car. The lack of revs is not as big of an issue as I thought perhaps it might have been. I've got a thing in my head that says 7,000 is a minimum for a sports car, but having actually driven it now, again, because of the manic scream of the supercharger, there is at least the feeling of doing high RPM, even if it isn't. So that disguises the low RPM cut effectively, surprisingly well. And for me, manual V6 all day long. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Yeah, it definitely, I'm sure it's got exactly the same gearing as the Evora, so it can really be wound up. It will still get to the same speeds, it just takes a little bit longer to get there. But it's still obviously a very rapid car, and real world pace is dramatic. But where it really comes alive is the corners. It wants to corner. It's a proper Lotus in that regard. It's got this appetite for cornering. It's not at all about straight line speed. It loves to be tipped into a corner. Yeah, that's where it's... Lovely road. I'm surprised how different the steering feels to the Evora. Its response is, as I said, is really quick. It doesn't feel quite as communicative for me, and I wonder, is it the larger front wheels as a possibility? Such a nice road, I had to do it again. So, corners. Yeah, it feels like a proper Lotus in the corners. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, because the steering does actually feel slightly faster off-centre. The car does tend to tip into corners a little bit. So the very, very first bit is quite calm, but then it does sort of tend to tip into corners a little bit more. The way that my Evora's weight transfer is so smooth side to side. Good man. This doesn't have that quite. As I said, with the abrupt cutout, there are things you want to sort of have to drive around if you're on track, because things that could unsettle it a little bit. But if you ask me if I'm enjoying it on a road like this, yes, without question. It's a fabulous car to drive. I just have the highest of standards when it comes to Lotus in terms of from a driving point of view, and this is crushing it in other areas, but they haven't spent a lot of time trying to make it a better driver's car than an Evora. So here we are in a relaxed cruise. 70 is 2,300. About that. I've got a little bit of wind noise coming from my left, from around here, but otherwise it's quiet. Is it any quieter than the Evora? I don't think it is much actually. I don't think they've gone crazy with the sound deadening. But yeah, of course you can do long distances. Is it actually that much of a better GT than the Evora? I think possibly not really, not materially. Again, in terms of access getting in now, the main advantage is the doors open wider, but you need the room to be able to do that. You can't, it's not so useful in a tight car park. There's a bit more room around the legs to swing in, but it's marginal, I'd say, the gains in terms of ingress and egress over an Evora. But there's no question, I've definitely enjoyed my time in this car, and that is the most important thing. There's no question that it is a great and fast and capable car on a British A&B road. It does feel happiest turning. I would love to take it on track and see what's what. I suppose for me it lacks ambition in the sense, but in terms of the car, for me it's irrelevant because I was the guy who bought the cars that no one else wanted to buy, so I like the unpopular Lotuses. There's no point in Lotus making a car for me. That's not the way to chase sales and larger volume, which they need. But I suppose for me, a Lotus was about, I believe that Lotus with money could have done better because of what they achieved without money, with tiny development budgets. Because of what they achieved, it felt like if the same development team had given a large checkbook and proper development money, they should therefore, in my mind, be able to beat the alternatives. Instead, Lotus's target was to catch up to the Cayman but not surpass it. They wanted it to be no less usable, no less practical than a Cayman. And in some areas they haven't quite hit that mark, have they? It lacks the front boot, the frunk, which the Cayman has. It's not much, the rear boot isn't really any bigger than an Evora, and the rear seat storage is the same. In fact, slightly smaller than an Evora. So I think the problem Lotus always had is that it can't just be about practicality, because the Evora did answer all of that compared to the Elise and Exige. So for me, Lotus has to be better at something to pull people away from, really entrenched brand loyalty. It has to be better at something, and I suppose this kind of lacks ambition for me. I really believe Lotus could have made a better driver's car than a Cayman. It might be in some ways, but it's not obvious. I would still rather have it to a Cayman. I just think and I think that's where they have succeeded. They've given a more exotic look, something they've always done really. It's got more exotic styling. It's a more special, more of an event to go in. But as an ownership proposition, who can say? So it's a difficult one, because none of what I say detracts from the fact in any way that it's a fantastic car to drive. It's a car I really enjoy driving, and I am really, really interested in seeing where they go from here. But I suppose again for me, it's not the world-beating car that Lotus, the thought of Lotus genius with proper development money should have led to. But really enjoyed driving it. It really enjoyed my day. Fascinating car. Surprisingly different to the Evora overall. I still never got my head around the radio. That's really complicated. So this would never be why I buy a car. This stuff. It's for a sports car. This is always, set of very low down the priority list for me. But I understand for other people it's not. But I hope you enjoyed watching the video. Thank you as always for watching. I really appreciate any support that you can give the channel. I look forward to the story where we go from here.